Well, it was a week ago in which Eric Cantor, House Majority Leader, was ousted in a primary defeat, and we haven't had a chance to talk to Trey Hardin about it. We'll get to that as well as other political news. Good morning, Trey Hardin, ABC News political analyst.
Good morning, McGraw, St. Louis Cardinals fan.
Yes. Let's first talk about President Obama and his handling of this Iraq crisis. What are your thoughts as you sit and watch this?
Well, I mean, I think in his defense, to a certain degree, I think he's really kind of in a tough spot. I don't see what options there really are at this point. We certainly are not going to engage on the ground or maybe even really engage that seriously militarily from the air. I don't think that much can be done at this point. I think this was inevitable. I think even if you throw in some airstrikes to support the Iraqis, I think that this terrorist organization, ISIS, will just kind of camp out in the mountains or camp out underground for a while, wait for it to end, and then just continue back in terms of marching towards Baghdad. The reality is that if you want to go point to a foreign policy failure on why this has happened, I mean, certainly, obviously, we can go back to the beginning of the George Bush administration on why did we even go into Iraq. And then, obviously, you could also point to President Obama's decision to kind of abruptly get U.S. troops out. But again, I still think that this was inevitable to happen. Where I would like to point to is Syria, because I think that the lack of action on Syria has facilitated this. There is clear intelligence and information that points to the fact that a lot of what was growing in Syria has been spreading into Iraq, and it is getting larger and larger as it gets closer to Baghdad.
Benjamin Netanyahu, who runs Israel, came out recently and said that President Obama, what he did with Syria and in Syria and about Syria, was spot on.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's more to that than we'll ever know, because I think it's very involved in classified intelligence information that it has them making certain decisions, and Netanyahu worrying that if he had jumped in, that it might have done something with Iran, or I think that Netanyahu wants to pick his battles to a certain degree right now, and I think his first primary focus is Iran, and he certainly wishes that I don't think he would have a problem at all if the U.S. was bombing nuclear facilities or chemical weapon facilities in and around Tehran. So I think it's about him picking his battles right now. But McGraw, this goes just to a bigger issue, and whether you're Republican or Democrat, it really cuts across party lines. I think the American people, and I've seen poll numbers on it as well too, even though national or foreign policy doesn't necessarily drive people to the polls, I think it's starting to become a bigger issue as a result of the failures of this administration. But I think the people are hungry for a consistent policy, no matter what party is leading the country. What I mean by that is, what is our policy in the Middle East? What is our policy on policing the world? What is our criteria and benchmarks that have to be hit? We can't just pick and choose the ones we want. I think that if a candidate stood up and started talking about that, it would be very appealing to the American people.
Let's talk about Eric Cantor. What are your thoughts as you watch that? They said, first, let's just get your thoughts now that you've had a week to digest it and sort of see what happened. What do you think?
Well, it was a total failure on his organization's part, first of all. It is not a Tea Party victory. This guy who beat him didn't even proclaim himself to be a Tea Party guy. Said he was essentially talking about Republican principles. I think if you and I were on the ballot, we would have won based on how this played out. And I think you would have gotten a higher vote tally than I would have.
All right, good. Just as long as we got that straight.
Yeah, exactly. But no, what this was Eric Cantor had become the poster child of, essentially, in this election and at this time, of the 11% approval ratings that Congress has around the country. He represented exactly, because of his position in leadership and because of how he's talked about issues, exactly what people, I think, are sick and tired of. And the other thing you have to remember in Virginia, I've worked a lot on political campaigns in Virginia, there's no registration by party. So when primaries happen, they are open primaries, meaning anyone can vote in them. Because, again, you are technically, you are not a Republican or a Democrat or an independent or a libertarian in Virginia. You are a voter. So, and in Virginia, what we know from a national standpoint, it's really become even more and more of a purple state, if you will, that you have a lot of educated, engaged independent voters. And I think a lot of them turned out as a vote kind of against what's going on in Washington. They saw Cantor as a big part of that problem, especially because he's in leadership. On immigration, for example, which was an issue that came up. I don't even know that if it was the specific positions on immigration. It was more like, Eric Cantor, you're the majority leader. Let's introduce a bill. Let's get some legislation going. Let's at least have a discussion or debate about it. What are we waiting for, kind of thing. So I think that there's those elements that played in as well. But certainly he got caught off guard, and then when he had to spend money, he went negative, which also I think didn't go over well with the people. Do
you think there's a story I saw where they think Democrats crossed over in that open primary that you talked about and voted for Eric Cantor? As sort of a protest vote or a stick-it-in-your-eye Cantor vote. Do you think that happened?
Well, it's interesting. I don't know if it was choreographed. I think that's awfully hard to do, and you would see more signs of that. But what I can tell you is that absolutely they probably crossed over, not even realizing that they were necessarily voting for another Republican, but voting against Eric Cantor. In 1996, I was involved in a significant primary between Senator John Warner, a longtime, very much revered senator in the state of Virginia, and against a guy named Jim Miller, a hardcore right-wing conservative. The reason why Senator Warner was being threatened is because he had opposed Ollie North or didn't endorse him 2 years prior. So the conservatives wanted Senator Warner out so badly. How we won that primary was appealing to many independents and Democrat voters in Northern Virginia and Virginia Beach who, like Senator Warner, wanted to kind of vote for him as a way to say thank you. Didn't realize that by voting for him, they were going to keep a Democrat out of the Senate, in that fall. But when you get to voters on an election like that, yes, I mean they will either vote against an Eric Cantor or vote for a Senator Warner, just because they're enthusiastic about it.
You combed your hair and put some lipstick on for Democrats? That's a story and a half right there.
Well, it's like I said, there's no registration in Virginia, but we absolutely went to some of those voter lists and said, hey, vote for Senator Warner. He's been there for you before, and it worked. Because, the other thing, too, is Eric Cantor, typically an incumbent wants a lower turnout in a primary, and this was a higher turnout. And when there's a high turnout, that usually means it's a vote against who's in office, and it's something wrong with him.
That's Trey Hardin reading the tea leaves for us. Trey, have a good week. Thanks for checking in.
You too, buddy. Take care.
6:30 here. Big